Hey everyone, and welcome. So we all know the basic deal in a market, right? Buyers want to pay as little as possible, and sellers want to charge as much as they can. But that brings up a really big question. Is there a right price for something from the perspective of society as a whole? Today, we're going to dig into welfare economics, which is this really powerful way of looking at markets to see who's winning, who's losing, and whether the final outcome is actually a good one for everyone. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to frame that big question. What even makes a price right? Then we'll build up the two essential tools we need to measure well-being. That's consumer surplus and producer surplus. After that, we'll put them together to see why the market equilibrium is such a big deal. And finally, we'll peek at what happens when that invisible hand of the market kind of fumbles the ball.
All right, let's jump right in with a question that's probably been on people's minds since the very first trade happened. Now, this question is more profound than it sounds. It moves us away from just observing what the price is, that's what we call a positive analysis, and into asking what the price should be. That's a normative analysis. It's not just about facts, it's about making a value judgment on whether the outcome is a good one.
So to even begin to answer that question, we need a framework, a set of tools. And that's exactly what welfare economics is. It gives us a way to measure the total benefits that buyers and sellers get from a market so we can figure out if we're really making the most of what we've got.
So let's start with the first piece of the puzzle. How can we possibly measure the benefit, the actual value that a buyer gets when they purchase something? Let's break it down.
The whole thing starts with this really intuitive idea called willingness to pay. I mean, think about it. For anything you want to buy, there's a maximum price you'd be willing to pay. A penny more, and you'd walk away. That number, that personal limit, is a direct measure of how much you value that good.
Okay, to make this super clear, let's imagine an auction for a rare Elvis album. Now pay close attention to this table because it's the foundation for everything that follows. We've got 4 fans. Taylor is a huge fan. She's willing to pay up to $100. Carrie values it a bit less at $80. Rihanna's at $70, and Gaga, well, she'd pay up to $50. Each person has their own unique valuation.
All right, now for the key calculation. Let's say the bidding goes up, and the final price lands at exactly $80. Who buys it? Well, only Taylor, because she's the only one whose willingness to pay is that high or higher. Now here's the magic. She was willing to pay $100, but she only had to pay $80. That $20 difference, that's her consumer surplus. It's like a bonus, a measure of the value she got for free.
Now, what's so cool is that if we take those willingness to pay numbers from the table, we can literally build the demand curve. Take a look at this chart. That first bar, its height is $100. That's Taylor. The second bar is 80. That's Carrie. This step-down shape is the demand curve for this small market. The height of the curve at any given quantity tells you the willingness to pay of what we call the marginal buyer. That's the person who would be the very next one to leave if the price went up.
And this visual right here, this is absolutely crucial, something you'll definitely want to lock in for your exams. Consumer surplus on a graph is always the area below the demand curve but above the price the consumer actually pays. In this case, that shaded rectangle is Taylor's $20 of consumer surplus. It's a perfect picture of the value she got.
So it makes sense that buyers are happier when prices fall, right? And this slide shows exactly why total consumer surplus goes up. It's a two-part story. First, look at the left image. At a higher price, P1, you have a certain amount of surplus. Now look right. When the price drops to P2, the original buyers who are already in the market get an even bigger surplus. They're paying even less than before. But on top of that, new buyers who couldn't afford the old price can now jump in, creating brand new surplus. It's a win-win for consumers.
Okay, that's the buyer side of the story. Now let's flip the coin and look at the sellers. And what you're about to see is that the logic here is a perfect mirror image of what we just went through. It's really elegant.
So, for sellers, the key idea is producer surplus. It's the amount of money a seller gets paid minus their cost of production. And when we say cost here, we mean their bottom line, their opportunity cost, the absolute lowest price they would accept before they decide it's just not worth their time.
Let's use another example to make this stick. Imagine you're taking bids to get your house painted, and 4 painters show up. Let's look at their costs. Andy is the most efficient. He can do the job for $500. Pablo needs at least $600, Claude $800, and Vincent $900. Each one is a different minimum price.
So, let's follow the calculation here. If you offer a price of exactly $600, who's willing to do the job? Well, Andy and Pablo would both be willing, but let's say Andy gets the job. He gets paid $600 for a job that only cost him $500. That extra $100, That's his producer surplus. It's the benefit he gets for participating in the market.
And you guessed it, just like before, we can use these costs to build the supply curve. See how the bars step up this time? The height of each bar is a painter's minimum price. At any price below $500, nobody's working. Offer $550 and only Andy steps up. The height of the supply curve always represents the cost of the marginal seller, the one who would drop out first if the price fell any lower.
And here it is, the other critical graph you need to know. Producer surplus is the area above the supply curve and below the price. That shaded area is Andy's $100 of surplus. You can see how it's the exact opposite of the consumer surplus graph. Once you get one, you get the other.
Okay, deep breath. We've got consumer surplus, which measures the benefit to buyers. We've got producer surplus, which measures the benefit to sellers. Now it's time to put them together and look at the market as a whole. This is where we see why that equilibrium point is so special.
Okay, let's think like a benevolent social planner for a second, someone who just wants the best possible outcome for society. Their goal would be to maximize total surplus. And as you can see, that's just consumer surplus plus producer surplus. But let's look closer at the second formula, because this is really insightful. Consumer surplus is value to buyers minus price. Producer surplus is price minus cost to sellers. When you add them together, the price term cancels out. What you're left with is super powerful. Total surplus is just the total value to buyers minus the total cost to sellers. We want that difference to be as big as possible.
And this right here is the whole picture in one graph. When we move from a few buyers and sellers to a huge market, those steps smooth out into these nice curves. And right there at the intersection, the equilibrium point, we get the biggest possible total surplus. The consumer surplus is that top triangle, the producer surplus is the bottom triangle, and together they make up the entire area between the supply and demand curves.
So, why is this equilibrium so great? This graph shows us why any other point is worse. Let's look at the left, at quantity Q1. If we produce too little, you can see there are still trades that could be made where the buyer's value is higher than the seller's cost. We're leaving welfare on the table. Now look at the right at quantity Q2. If we produce too much, we're making units where the cost to the seller is actually higher than the value to the buyer. We're literally wasting resources. Only at that sweet spot, the equilibrium quantity, do we perfectly squeeze out every last drop of potential surplus.
So let's just pause and appreciate what this means. The free market, all on its own, with no central planner pulling the strings, achieves these three incredibly efficient outcomes. 1. The people who get the stuff are the ones who wanted it the most. 2. The people who make the stuff are the ones who can do it most cheaply. And 3. We produce the exact quantity that makes society as a whole as well off as possible. It's pretty remarkable.
But, and you knew there was the but coming, right? This beautiful, efficient outcome depends on some key assumptions. When those assumptions don't hold true in the real world, the market can lead to an inefficient outcome, and that's what we call market failure.
So, what can throw a wrench in the works? Well, here are two classic examples. First, you have market power. Think of a monopoly, a single seller who can jack up the price because there's no competition. That's not efficient. Then you have externalities. This is a huge one. Think of pollution from a factory. The price of the good doesn't reflect the cost of the damage to the environment, which is a side effect that harms people who weren't even part of the transaction. In both of these cases, the market equilibrium is not going to maximize the total well-being of society.
And this leaves us with a really important question, especially for anyone studying law or public policy. The invisible hand is an incredibly powerful force for good, but it's not perfect. The real trick is figuring out not just why markets work, but also recognizing when they fail. Because understanding that failure is the absolute first step toward designing smart interventions, be it laws or regulations, that can help nudge the market back toward a better, more efficient outcome for everyone.